Tonight, we'll look at all the executions scheduled for June 2025.
You are watching Final Sentence.
Let's begin with the first one on the calendar. Anthony F. Wainwright. Crime: intimate assault and murder of Carmen Gayhart. Execution scheduled for June 10th. It seemed like any other afternoon in Lake City, Florida. A young mother, just 23 years old, was leaving the supermarket. Carmen Gayhart was loading bags into her Ford Bronco. She had a future ahead of her, a small daughter, a life to live. But she didn't know that, at that very moment, two men were watching her, and one of them had death in his eyes. Anthony F. Wainwright and Richard Hamilton had escaped from a minimum security prison in North Carolina. Two inmates on the run, with no plan, no fear, no limits. They had already stolen, already crossed several states. Now they wanted something else, a vehicle and a victim. On April 27, 1994, Carmen was approached in the parking lot of a Winn-Dixie. No witnesses, no cameras. They forced her into her vehicle and took her. For hours, they drove north through the state. They dragged her into a wooded, isolated area, far from any help. And there, in that wet and silent corner of earth, everything ended. Carmen was subjected to an intimate assault, then executed with 2 shots to the head from a .22 caliber rifle. Her body was left among leaves, branches, and mud, as if her life had meant nothing. For 2 days, no one knew where she was. No leads, no trace, until the killers made a mistake. A highway patrol unit in Mississippi spotted a suspicious vehicle. It was Carmen's Ford Bronco, but she wasn't driving. Wainwright and Hamilton were inside. When the officers tried to stop them, they sped up. The chase began. Shots were fired. The windshield shattered. A bullet grazed Wainwright's arm. The vehicle spun out, slid off the road, and stopped in a cloud of dust. The officers pulled them out by force. That's where the escape ended. At the station, Hamilton broke down, said it hadn't been his idea. He drew a map, marked a spot in the woods, and there, among twisted trees and damp ground, they found Carmen's body. The trial left no doubt. DNA, confessions, the murder weapon, the map, the vehicle. Everything pointed to the same place and the same face. In June 1995, Anthony F. Wainwright was sentenced to death. So was Hamilton. But time gave them different paths. Hamilton died in prison in 2023. Wainwright, on the other hand, spent 3 decades on death row, appealing, waiting, surviving, until now. The governor of Florida signed his death warrant. The date is set, June 10, 2025. The needle awaits at Rayford State Prison. He will be executed by lethal injection. Gregory Hunt, Alabama, convicted of intimate assault and murder. Execution scheduled for June 10th. August 2nd, 1988. Cordova, Alabama. It was early, and the town had barely started to wake. In an apartment on the 2nd floor, a woman was banging on the door to her roommate's bedroom. She was shouting her name, calling again and again. No response. The night before, they had heard noises, what sounded like a fight, but didn't think much of it. Now, the door was locked from the inside and the silence was complete. She didn't wait any longer. She called emergency services. When police arrived and forced the door open, what they found inside was something the officers of Cordova would never forget. Karen Lane, 29 years old, was lying on the floor. There was blood on the bed, on the carpet, on her clothes. Her body was covered in bruises and wounds, more than 50, 20 of them on her head alone. And before she died, she had been the victim of an intimate assault. It was a long, violent, deliberate death. There were no signs of forced entry, no broken windows. Nothing had been stolen. That narrowed the investigation fast. Karen knew her killer, and most likely she had let him in herself. She had ended a relationship weeks earlier. He hadn't taken it well. Gregory Hunt. Several neighbors had seen him lingering outside the building, waiting on the sidewalk, calling her non-stop. That same night, some said they heard shouting. One even claimed they heard the name Greg. Hunt was arrested the next day. He had scratches, marks on his arms, broken fingernails. His story changed every time he spoke. First, he denied seeing her. Then he said he'd stopped by. Then claimed he didn't remember. But the forensic evidence was overwhelming. His DNA was on Karen's body. and the experts confirmed signs of struggle. She fought with everything she had. It wasn't enough. The trial was held in 1990. The jury found him guilty of capital murder. He was sentenced to death. For decades, he filed appeals, claimed the trial was unfair, said he couldn't remember, that he didn't have proper legal defense, but every court ruled the same. The crime was brutal, intentional, and premeditated. Now, Alabama is preparing to carry out the sentence. Gregory Hunt will be executed on June 10, 2025, by nitrogen hypoxia, a silent clinical method with no needles, no electricity, just a mask, gas, and a few minutes of waiting. The case that began with a scream behind a door will end in absolute silence. John Hanson, August 31, 1999. It was a sweltering afternoon in Tulsa, Oklahoma. The parking lot at the Promenade Mall was full, cars moving in and out, rushed families, people carrying bags. Among them walked Mary Bowles. She was 77, a retired schoolteacher, a mother, a grandmother. She had lived alone since losing her husband. That day, like so many others, she left a store and headed to her car. She didn't know someone was following her. As she reached her car, two men intercepted her. One grabbed her arm. The other opened the door. They forced her into the back seat and climbed in with her. No one screamed. No one noticed. Within seconds, the car vanished into traffic. The men were John Hanson and Victor Miller, fugitives from a federal prison in Louisiana. They traveled the country robbing, armed, leaving no witnesses. They drove with Mary in the back seat for miles until they reached a gravel pit north of Tulsa near Owasso. They stopped, but they weren't alone. Gerald Max Thurman, 44, the property owner, noticed the unfamiliar vehicle. He walked over to check. Before he could say anything, Miller shot him. Thurman collapsed, wounded. Hanson kept going. He led Mary into a more remote area, past brush and dirt, made her walk, then shot her multiple times in the back. He covered her body with branches and left. Thurman was taken to a hospital. He survived for 2 weeks but never recovered. Mary Bowles was reported missing. Her family searched for days. Her body was found on September 7th, partially buried in the gravel pit, right where Hanson had left her. 2 days later, Hanson and Miller tried to rob a credit union in Tulsa. They failed. They were arrested. They had weapons, cash, and the same clothing witnesses had described. Forensics closed the case. Fingerprints, ballistics, DNA. In 2001, John Hanson was sentenced to death for the murder of Mary Bowles. He also received a life sentence for the murder of Gerald Thurman. His accomplice, Victor Miller, was sentenced to life without parole. Hanson spent more than 20 years in a federal prison. He was transferred to Oklahoma in March 2025. His execution is scheduled for June 12th by lethal injection at the McAllister State Penitentiary. The case never made national headlines. No big media coverage, but in the state's legal records it remains. A double murder committed in broad daylight by two men who just wanted to keep running. Stephen Stanko, April 7, 2005. Murrells Inlet, South Carolina. A quiet town, narrow streets, the kind of place where everyone knows everyone. Laura Ling, 43, lived with her teenage daughter in a modest neighborhood. She had started dating a man she met at the local library. His name was Stephen Stanko. She let him stay for a few days. She had no idea who she was letting in. That night, Stanko attacked. He strangled Laura to death. Then he went after her daughter. He assaulted her intimately, beat her, and cut her throat, believing he had killed her. But he hadn't. The young woman survived and managed to call for help.
How old are you? 15. I tried to put up a fight. I tried. I really did.
Did you see who did it?
Yeah. It was my mom's boyfriend.
The next morning, Stanko drove to Conway to the home of Henry Turner, a 74-year-old friend. He brought breakfast. They talked for a while. Turner went to the bathroom to shave. And there, without a word, Stanko shot him in the back using a pillow to muffle the sound. Then he shot him again in the chest. He took his truck, emptied his bank account. He fled to Augusta, Georgia, posed as a businessman attending the Masters golf tournament. A woman took him in. She later saw him on the news, recognized him, and called the police. He was arrested without resistance on April 12th. In 2006, he was sentenced to death for the murder of Laura Ling, and given 110 years in prison for the assault and attempted murder of her daughter. In 2009, he received a second death sentence for the murder of Henry Turner. After years of failed appeals, South Carolina scheduled his execution for June 13, 2025. He has until May 30th to choose the method: lethal injection, electric chair, or firing squad. Comment below if his decision has already been announced. Thomas Lee Gudinas, May 23, 1994, Orlando, Florida. A humid, silent dawn. The city center was beginning to empty out. Michelle McGrath, 27, was leaving Barbarella's around 2:45 a.m. She was walking alone to her car. She never made it. At 7:30 a.m., her body was found in an alley next to a school. She was lifeless, showing clear signs of extreme violence and intimate assault. The scene was brutal. That same night, another woman, Rochelle Smith, had been followed by a man to her car. She managed to lock herself inside and escape. Later, she identified Thomas Lee Gudinas as her attacker. Gudinas had been at the same bar as Michelle. His friends testified that they lost track of him before closing. A school employee saw a man fleeing the alley where the body was later found. It was Gudinas. The evidence was overwhelming: fingerprints on Michelle's vehicle, biological traces on her body, and confessions to his roommates. One of them stated Gudinas had said, "I killed her," and then. He never finished the sentence. He didn't need to. In 1995, he was convicted of first-degree murder, 2 counts of sexual assault, attempted sexual assault, and armed robbery. The sentence: death. After nearly 30 years on death row, Governor Ron DeSantis signed his death warrant. It is scheduled for June 24, 2025 at 6 p.m. at Florida State Prison in Stark. It will be Florida's 7th execution this year. All have been by lethal injection, a crime that shook Orlando in the 90s, a sentence that, after decades, is finally about to be carried out. Richard Gerald Jordan, January 14, 1976, Gulfport, Mississippi. A mild morning, gray skies. In a house in the Woodland Hills neighborhood, Edwina Martyr, 37, was home alone. She was the wife of a local businessman, a mother, a homemaker. That morning, someone knocked on the door claiming to be from a utility company. She didn't hesitate to open it, but the man wasn't there to check anything. His name was Richard Gerald Jordan. He was 29. What seemed like an ordinary visit turned into the darkest moment of Edwina's life. Jordan pulled out a gun and forced her into her own car. He drove her outside the city, into a wooded area in Harrison County. He made her walk among the trees. Then he executed her with a single gunshot. After that, he called Edwina's husband, pretended she was still alive, demanded a ransom of $25,000. He planned to pick up the money at a gas station, but the police were already waiting for him. He was arrested the same day. He confessed without hesitation, said he had picked the family at random, just looking for someone who looked wealthy, said it had all been planned from the start, that he never intended to leave any witnesses. In March 1976, he was sentenced to death, but his case became a legal spiral that would last decades. Appeals, overturned verdicts, new trials, motions, delays. He was sentenced to death at least 4 times for the same crime. Now, at 78 years old, Richard Gerald Jordan is the longest-serving death row inmate in Mississippi. He has spent nearly half a century awaiting execution. On June 25, 2025, the state is finally set to carry it out. Capital punishment is scheduled for that day. Mississippi allows multiple execution methods: lethal injection, nitrogen hypoxia, electric chair, or firing squad. I know some might wonder, can't they use all of them?
Execution date has been set for Mississippi's longest tenured death row inmate. 78-year-old Richard Gerald Jordan has been selected to death in 4 different trials for the Harrison County kidnapping and murder of Edwina Martyr in 1976.
Jordan has until June 10th to choose. Now, let's look beyond June. What other executions are scheduled for 2025? Byron Black. Execution scheduled for August 5th, 2025. In 1989, Byron Black, along with accomplices, broke into a family's house in Memphis, Tennessee. During the robbery, Black killed Angela Clay and her 2 daughters. The crime was especially violent, and Black was arrested after a long police pursuit. He was sentenced to death in 1990. The execution is scheduled for August 5, 2025, at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution, where he can choose between lethal injection or the electric chair. Timothy L. Coleman. Execution scheduled for October 30, 2025. On March 23, 1996, Timothy L. Coleman killed Melinda Stevens, a woman who had been a confidential informant for the police in Springfield, Ohio. He killed her in her home to stop her from continuing to provide information to authorities. He was arrested shortly after the crime, and during his trial it was revealed that Coleman had a history of violence. He was sentenced to death in 1997, and his execution is scheduled for October 30, 2025, at Southern Ohio Correctional Facility via lethal injection. Kareem M. Jackson. Execution scheduled for December 10, 2025. In 1995, Kareem M. Jackson and his accomplice killed Antonio Hunter and Terrence Walker during a robbery attempt in Franklin, Ohio. Jackson, in an impulsive attack, shot both victims, leaving them dead at the scene. He was arrested shortly after and sentenced to death in 1996. The execution is scheduled for December 10, 2025, at Southern Ohio Correctional Facility via lethal injection. Harold Wayne Nichols. Execution scheduled for December 11, 2025. On November 15, 1988, Harold Wayne Nichols murdered Karen Pulley, a 43-year-old woman in Chattanooga, Tennessee. Nichols, who had planned the robbery, attacked her brutally and killed her in her own home. He was arrested days after the crime. He was sentenced to death in 1990, and his execution is scheduled for December 11, 2025, at Riverbend Maximum Security Institution via lethal injection or the electric chair, at the inmate's choice. Quizzy Bryan. Execution scheduled for January 7, 2026. In 1999, Quizzy Bryan, during a robbery, murdered Carla Morris, a 42-year-old white woman. Bryan, in his attempt to rob her, brutally attacked her in her home in Ohio. He beat her and strangled her, leaving her dead on the floor. When police investigated the crime, they found physical evidence linking him to the scene. He was arrested shortly after the murder. In trial, Bryan was sentenced to death in 2001. The execution is scheduled for January 7, 2026, at Southern Ohio Correctional Facility, and will be carried out via lethal injection. And now a brief recap of executions already carried out in 2025, as of today. And tell me, is there any case you'd like to know more about? Ted Bundy, Aileen Wuornos, the Menendez brothers? Let me know in the comments. What's the most shocking or memorable criminal case you've ever heard of? If you enjoy this kind of content, please like the video, leave a comment, and most importantly, subscribe to Final Sentence. Accept no imitations.